Hello, my name is David Johnson, and I'm here with Bhante Vimalaramsi. He studied history at the University of San Diego. He became a Buddhist monk in Thailand in 1986 and has been in the robes ever since. He's trained in Thailand, Burma, and Sri Lanka. He's done many retreats in the Mahasi Sayadaw tradition, but now has found his own path that has taken him back to the teachings found in the suttas themselves. He teaches retreats at his Missouri Center in the U.S. and conducts retreats in Asia and around the world. He is the author of many books, including his major book on meditation, Life is Meditation, Meditation is Life. We'll be doing a number of interviews, so we won't cover everything in this one discussion. This will be, I believe, the second one of a number of them to come. We'll move into other areas, and I also have a number of questions from social media that have been submitted. Well, let me ask you a more general question based on what we just said. Here's a question from, I think it's Matt. Why should I meditate? What will I gain?
Well, you go from suffering a lot and being dissatisfied with life. The reason I started meditating in the first place was because I was depressed. I was suffering a lot. I didn't like the way my life was going, although I was successful. I was unhappy with it. And it was at a time when there was a lot of Indian gurus coming to the country. And I started going to different groups and I'd ask them about meditation. Well, does this help with being unhappy? Oh yeah, you get real happy when you do the meditation. But they didn't tell me how to meditate. They just said, well, just sit and meditate. And I wasn't satisfied with that. I went to the Theosophical Society in San Diego with some friends, and we ran across practical insight meditation. Now, I'm a dumb American. I don't know anything about Buddhism. I don't know anything about what the meditation is going to actually give me or help me, but it had instructions in the meditation, and I knew I wanted to meditate. So I was a manager of a large store, and I decided I don't want to do this anymore, and I went off for 2 weeks just with this book and practiced, and I got to a place I didn't understand, so I started looking for a teacher. And I went to the end of it. I went to the end of Vipassana, and I saw that it didn't really help with the suffering that I was having. It made it more apparent, but it didn't really help me overcome the suffering.
Yeah, and that was the second question. The Buddha said life is suffering, so you're suffering, and why does he say that? Life is suffering. This is all I hear from people.
He doesn't say that.
Life is suffering.
He says there is suffering in life, and that's a whole different ballgame. I know that the Burmese were very big on just talking about suffering. But in the suttas, one in particular, it says there's a wrong way to practice and there's a right way to practice. Now this is what the Buddha said. The wrong way to practice is to focus on suffering. Everything is suffering. The right way to practice is focus on the cessation of the suffering. And what is the cessation? It's letting go of the craving, the cause of suffering. And what's the way that you do it? You practice right effort. You practice using the 6 R's, which I just went through.
And it's when there's a cessation of suffering, what does that lead to? Is that just a kind of a
leads
null
to
area or
deep understanding of how this process works, and you start to see more and more how this process of dependent origination actually does work. Now, when I was in Burma, I was at Mahasi Center for 8 months, and there were a lot of his books that he'd written, and one of his books was on dependent origination. And I started reading the introduction, and he said, it's very, very hard to understand dependent origination. It's very difficult. And he wrote a book that was very hard to understand and very difficult. But as I kept going back to the suttas and finding more and more about the suttas, I started seeing that it's not so hard to understand. It doesn't have to be an intellectual understanding. It has to be an experiential understanding. And that's what happens a lot with the suttas. People try to understand them just from intellect instead of actually doing the practice and following the instructions that he gives.
Well, let me ask you this. What is the goal of all this? What is enlightenment or awakening? Why do I want it?
Having more balance in your mind. And I'm talking about true balance, not an intellectual kind of balance.
Not just less stress.
Well, the stress becomes less as you stop identifying with it and taking it personally. And it's a real interesting phenomenon to watch yourself go from being highly emotional anytime anything happens, and you do this kind of meditation, and you start seeing that there's more balance in your mind. You're recognizing how these things arise and how you take them personally, and you start to use the 6 R's more and more. And you start using loving kindness meditation more and more. An interesting thing is, just in the Majjhima Nikaya, there's 4 mentions of mindfulness of breathing meditation. There's 11 different suttas that talk about loving kindness meditation. Which do you think he taught more? Which did he talk about more? So that gives you a clue. And also, he's talking about jhana, but he's not talking about one-pointed jhana. He tried that at the start of his search, and he went to the end of them, and he said that this is not attaining nibbana yet. He wanted to get to a place that has deep peace and deep equanimity and full understanding and loving kindness that's real, not an intellectual exercise.
So you talk about nibbana. What is that?
It's a letting go of craving. And it's a purifying of the mind. And you see that in your own practice while you're doing this with the letting go of the craving. You see the personality change where you don't get so mad like you used to, where you don't get so sad like you used to, you don't get so depressed like you used to.
So are you saying Nibbana eliminates these things?
Eventually. It's not an overnight phenomena.
So it could take 10, 20, 40 years.
It can take as long as it takes. It depends on the person that's doing it. Now, I think Nibbana should be another discussion. But it is learning how to recognize craving using your mindfulness. How does this actually occur? When you start going deeper and deeper in your meditation, you see more and more clearly how these links of dependent and origination work and how to let go of the craving because of it.
Well, here's another question. We'll get back to the basics again. The Buddha lived over 2,000 years ago. Why is what he taught relevant to today's modern complex world?
Because mind is mind. It all works in the same way. People in Asia, when I was teaching there, they didn't like it when I told them that their mind was the same as somebody in the West. It works exactly in the same way. For all human beings, mind works exactly in the same way. Now, there's different attachments that make you think you're so much different than somebody else. But when you start seeing this as a process that's impersonal, you start seeing more and more that everybody is the same. Now, there's a lot of concern about women. Well, there's no difference between men and women when it comes to meditation. Everybody has the same kind of insights as to how these things work. If you start calling yourself one gender or another, there's attachment there. You're not seeing exactly how mind works. And that's in the Anguttara Nikaya. When Mara came to a nun to try to distract her and called her a woman, and she said back to him, there's no such a thing as a man or a woman. It's only this process. This is how this works.
I guess when you close your eyes, you're really not sure.
Right.
So some people will come up to me and say, well, you're a Buddhist, so do you worship the Buddha?
No, absolutely I don't worship the Buddha. I highly respect the Buddha.
You don't pray to the Buddha?
I don't pray to the Buddha.
All these chants, they're not prayers?
No, they're supposed to be suttas that he said. And the monks memorize these things and they chant these things, not as some form of rite and ritual, not as some form of gaining power, but as a reminder, this is what the Buddha said.
Okay, so they're reciting the Buddha's teachings then.
Right. Some of the chanting gets carried away and it's like a song, but it's supposed to be just reciting. This is what the Buddha said. Now there's some question as to the first 500 years after the Buddha died, that was the monk's job, just to recite these suttas. And the way they kept it, it's more accurate to do things this way than it is when you write things down. Why? Because I'm going to memorize the entire Majjhima Nikaya. So I spend all of my time memorizing this. Then I go to other monks that have memorized it, and there's a group of them. And you say, I want to test myself to make sure I'm accurate. So they start reciting, and if they miss one word, the other monks all agree that word, that's not the right word for this place. Then he has to start over again at the start of that sutta and correct it so that it's accurate. And when that's done, it's really, really closer to the actual sutta than what's being written down. You have things that are written down, they can be in Pali, they can be in English, they can be in any other language. But once it's written down, then you start having little mistakes that start happening. Unless there's other monks that memorize the suttas. If you follow what the Buddha said, and you use right effort, the effect is immediate. There is a lightening of the mind. There's a clarity in the mind. There's a purity in the mind that actually occurs. If you're one-pointed concentration or watching things and noting things and forgetting about letting go of the craving, then there is no immediate effect. Why? Because that craving is still there. That's the thing that needs to be let go of.
So what you're saying is you're dealing with craving right in the moment.
Yes.
That whereas the concentration meditation tends to want to, it gets rid of it, and it gets into these so-called pure jhana states where you assume that if you can get there, this will lead to some awakening experience that will take care of all the craving and get rid of it all. But what you're proposing is to deal with it one craving moment at a time and relax and release it.
Right.
Very interesting.
And that's why the TWIM method, which is not my method, it is what the Buddha is teaching as right effort. That's why it works. That's why there is personality development. When you're doing one-pointed concentration and you get very deep into a jhana, your mind is pure at that time because there's no hindrance in your mind. But when you come out, because you haven't let go of the craving, those hindrances are there. I remember reading a magazine on meditation some years ago. And it's talking about how nice meditation is and all the benefits, and how when the man was out in his daily life, how chaotic things were and how he didn't like it. And the only time he had any peace was when he went into his room where there was no distractions and sat in meditation. Well, is that real meditation? Or is that just a way of pushing it aside, pushing away that craving for a short period of time?
Yeah, I think that about says it. You can either avoid the disturbances and distractions by going into your room and closing the door, or take them one at a time and solve them and release, relax, and yeah. So what are the precepts, and should we follow them, or are they for retreats?
They're for every day.
So the precepts...
Not to kill. Why? Because when you kill, you have dissatisfaction and dislike in your mind. Not to take anything that's not given. Why? Because you feel guilty when you take somebody else's stuff. Not to have any wrong sexual activity. Now this depends a lot on the laws of the land. In some countries they have multiple wives and it's okay with the law, so that makes it okay in that country. In this country, it is not having sexual activity with another person's partner.
So it's kind of like adultery.
Well, it can be, but
Even
another person's partner.
Yeah, and even outside of marriage, it's somebody else's partner. You can't basically fool around on them either.
Why? Because it causes a guilty mind and it causes problems. Not to have sexual activity with anyone that's under the care of their guardians, that they're too young. Basically, it's not having any sexual activity that causes anyone to have pain arise, to have dislike arise. The fourth precept has 4 parts to it. Don't tell lies. Now, I've had students that they would say, well, I'm a salesman, I have to lie. No, you don't. When you start following this precept without breaking it, people naturally start trusting what you say, so it turns out to be a big advantage. Little white lies are still lies. So don't do that. It's better to say nothing than it is to say a lie. Don't divide one group from another. Don't curse. Now, this is a big one in this country. I know a monk that curses, and it's always a shock. I keep on thinking, when that monk is using this foul language, he's teaching his students to break the precepts. So that's a real problem.
Yeah, I know it's pretty hard to watch TV or movies without hearing a lot of those words.
Yeah. Or listen to the radio, or just hearing in your daily activity.
So how do you stop doing that one? It seems really habitually stuck in there.
Well, realize that it's going to hurt your meditation.
Mm-hmm.
I had a friend that he cursed like a trooper for 30 years. I was teaching him for 30 years. I kept on telling him, don't break the precepts. He would get off retreat, now I can say and do anything that I want. That was his attitude. I can go back to being the way that I was.
So he only used precepts on a retreat.
Right. And he would come for a 2-week retreat. After 10 days of having all kinds of problems in his meditation, he would start to calm down, and then it was time to get off retreat, so he didn't have any benefit. So cursing is a real problem. And gossip. Most gossip has to do with lies. Stuff that you make up about somebody else that you don't like or whatever. Don't do that. Only say things that cause concord, that cause getting along with other people. And I've had retreats where people say, yeah, but there's some people that aren't on retreat that are friends and I want to talk about them with somebody else. Fine. Imagine that they are standing right beside you when you're saying this stuff. Don't make up stories. That's what gossip really is all about.
So talk as though they're in the room. If you're talking about them,
Right.
just as though they're sitting there listening to everything you say.
Right. Okay, this is an important one, this 5th precept. Don't take drugs or alcohol that dull your mind. It doesn't mean you don't take medicine when it's needed. But, only a beer doesn't really matter. Only a glass of wine, it does matter. And it dulls your mind. I can tell people who have been drinking when they come to retreat because their mind is dull. If you're interested in really keeping these precepts, then you won't drink or alcohol. Oh, but a little bit, yeah, there's a lot of teachers that say it's okay. No, it's not. You have a tendency to break the other precepts, and it affects your meditation in a negative way. So there's going to be some teachers that say it doesn't really matter. but it does. When I was in Burma, I had a cold. So I went to one of the teachers, and he said, well, just take an aspirin, that'll help. And I only took half an aspirin. And that aspirin affected my meditation negatively. And that's a good kind, quote, a good kind of drug. It still affects your mind. It's better not to take these things. Don't do that to yourself. Well, it's been a rough day and I need to relax. Well, if you need to relax, go sit and let your mind relax. Don't give it artificial stimulants.
Now, I know that some people will say, well, I just can't do it. Can they follow 4 precepts?
If they don't keep all the precepts, they're going to run into problems.
Mm-hmm. Especially
and
if
it's problems they make for themselves.
Because of that 5th precept, the intoxicants, they're going to just break other precepts, probably.
Right. They have a tendency to. But I had one student that she got into her meditation pretty deeply, and she was at a place where she had some wine, and she drank it, and she said it affected her mind negatively for 3 days. Just a little, not even a full glass of wine.
Mm-hmm.
So, what's your priority? Do you want to have a clear mind?
I know there's a lot of people that are on prescription drugs, and that seems to be like half the population. What do we say to them?
When you start to learn how to meditate, and you practice the meditation, pain is not such a distraction. And a lot of the problem with pain when it arises is the craving, I don't like it. Now, when you follow the Buddha's instruction, he says, allow the pain to be there. He had pain. He had pain in his back, but it didn't affect his mind. So it's kind of important not to get hooked on taking these different medicines. And personally, I am much more at ease with natural products than I am taking medicines. When I go to a doctor and they say, what medicines you're taking, is none. I take vitamins and I try to eat fairly well. I don't have physical problems like this.
Well, I think that's a good place to stop. Thank you, Bhante Vimalaramsi, for your time. And I hope people have gotten a little bit out of this discussion, and we'll have a few more in the coming weeks.